Welcome to the TAILABS Optical LAN video using Dynamic ARP Inspection. The purpose of this video is to provide knowledge and instruction of the use and application of the TAILABS Optical LAN Dynamic ARP Inspection feature. The topics covered in this video will be an overview of the Dynamic ARP Inspection feature in the TAILABS Optical LAN system, the process for configuring DAI in Panorama, and the tools available to monitor DAI processes. Dynamic ARP Inspection provides protection from ARP spoofing attacks and helps to ensure that the proper MAC IP binding is maintained in the ARP table of the switch. ARP spoofing occurs when a host uses a gratuitous ARP to bind its own MAC to an IP address that it wants to spoof. If accepted, the gratuitous ARP will cause all the devices on the subnet to update their ARP tables to send traffic to the hacker's MAC for traffic to the spoofed IP. Typically, these are man-in-the-middle attacks, and the hacker will intercept and then forward the traffic to the correct MAC for that IP binding so that the victim is not tipped off that their traffic is being diverted. This attack only works within Layer 2 domains. Once the hacker has redirected traffic, he can then inspect, modify, or drop the user's traffic on the subnet. Dynamic ARP Inspection works via two mechanisms. The first is DHCP snooping. DHCP snooping allows the system to maintain a database of DHCP entries with MAC to IP address bindings. This table is used to track the legitimate binding of MACs to IPs and ensure that all ARP entries agree with the bindings from DHCP. Dynamic ARP Inspection also uses ACLs to handle static IP addresses and maintain those entries in the database. In TAILABS Optical LAN, DAI must be enabled globally in the OLT for DAI features to be permitted for use on the OLT. To configure DAI on the OLT, right-click on the desired OLT, select Protocol, Dynamic ARP. When the admin state is enabled, DAI support will be turned on. Logging admin state defines whether to log the events occurring during DAI processing. Setting logging type to deny will log only denied or dropped ARPs. Permit will log only permitted ARPs, and both will log both permitted and denied ARPs. Typically, you should only log denied ARPs unless debugging a situation. Logging all permitted ARPs can cause logging of hundreds of events per second. Enable Destination MAC Check ensures that the destination MAC of the Ethernet header agrees with the target MAC in the ARP body of ARP responses. This should typically be enabled. Enable ARP IP Check ensures that the IP address is a valid IP address and will exclude all invalid IP addresses. IP is checked in all ARP requests and responses. This is typically enabled. Enable Source MAC Check verifies that ARP header and body have the same source MAC address in both ARP requests and ARP responses. This is typically enabled. If desired, source IP protection can be added. If this feature is enabled, once the source IP is bound, it will drop all packets that do not match the source IP to MAC binding learned from DHCP. DAI is enabled on a per VLAN basis as well. This is done in the VLAN Properties tab of the switching application. For each VLAN which you wish DAI to be enforced, the VLAN properties for that VLAN should have the Enable DAI attribute checked. In the port profile, there's also the option to disable DAI on specific ports. There may be special requirements in your network which are valid but violate the DAI rules. Configure a port to be a trusted port and no ARP checks will be performed for that port. It is rare that this would be needed. One typical use case is if the device does not use IP version 4 and either uses IP version 6 or an ether type different than IP version 4. Some discovery protocols and special purpose protocols use proprietary non-IP packets and therefore no IP to MAC binding can be learned and no ARP or DHCP snooping can occur. Some devices have static IP addresses and therefore are never going to send DHCP messages. The DAI agent can learn IP and MAC from a static IP when it ARPs. This is allowed if the IP in use has no learned binding. The binding will be added to the table. Static IP will be learned automatically, but in highly secured environments, this may not be acceptable. In the ACL profile, the port can be set up for a sticky MAC ACL, allowing the MAC to be learned and then bound to the port. If deployed with maximum MAC of 1, this would ensure only that MAC was present. Also, an IP address filter can be added if needed. In the switching application, port MAC addresses and IP addresses can be listed using the forwarding database tool. Lists can be created based on port address, full or partial MAC address, full or partial IP address, and VLAN. The IP addresses are only available in the table when dynamic ARP is enabled on the OLT and the VLAN. Statistics on the DAI interface can be found in the Statistics tab of the DAI Property dialog. Enter the VLAN and click Locate to retrieve the statistics for that VLAN. The statistics displayed show the number of ARPs that were forwarded by the DAI process for that VLAN, the number of ARPs that were deemed to be incorrectly formatted and were dropped, the number of ARPs that were deemed good and had a DHCP binding, ARPs permitted because a valid ARP ACL was found, ARPs dropped because no binding was found in the DHCP binding database or the ARP ACL list for the VLAN, ARPs that were dropped because the source MAC in the message header and the body did not agree, the number of times the destination MAC in the message header and body did not agree, ARPs that were dropped because the IP was invalid, and the number of packets that were dropped because the IP source and source MAC in the packet did not match the binding. This concludes this video. In it we have discussed an overview of the dynamic ARP inspection feature in the TELEDS optical LAN system, the process for configuring DAI in Panorama, and the tools available to monitor DAI processes.